Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Crimson and in this video we are going to be starting our look through the Bloodborne official artworks artbook. I am a massive fan of Bloodborne, to put it lightly. I have enough Bloodborne memorabilia to be slightly embarrassed about. I have tattoos of Bloodborne. I have the Prime 1 Bloodborne statue, which cost a pretty penny, but I absolutely love it. I will put a video, a picture of it on screen somewhere in the next couple of seconds. And yeah, Bloodborne is one of, if not my favorite video game of all time. I am a huge fan of From Software games, both in the Soulsborne genre and in the Armored Core genre. However, Bloodborne, to me, is the very best. Nothing before or after From Software has ever topped it, and I doubt it ever will, unless they make a sequel or unless we get a Bloodborne PC port, which I'm still holding out hope for. So, as in the Berserk video, I brought down two of my Nendroids, my Hunter Nendroid, equipped with pistol and saw spear with a little lantern behind him, and also the doll Nendroid, which when I saw her available for pre-order, I instantly bought her without a second thought. I also have the two Figma statues of both the doll and the hunter. I was going to try and include them in the video, but they were too big and they were just getting in the way. So, let's get started, shall we? One thing, however, before we do get started, as this is a From Software game, I'm not sure if there is an English version. However, this book is in Japanese, so I will be unable to read any of the passages or descriptions for any of the items, unfortunately. If you read Japanese, feel free to pause whenever you like and read them. So, let's get started. The art of official artworks of Bloodborne. I love, you guys might not be able to see it, but the cover has this incredible leather finish to it, and the embossed logo in silver of Bloodborne official artworks. This is probably one of my favorite art books that I have, not just because it's Bloodborne, but just because of the quality of the material inside. Whoops, sorry about that. That's embarrassing. This is the cover without the book sleeve, but the book sleeve is so nice. So we start off with another page, Bloodborne, the official artworks, this time with the hunter symbol. As you know, if you have played Bloodborne, this is representing a hunter or a man hanging upside down. And I should have said this at the beginning, but if you have not played Bloodborne and would like to play Bloodborne, do not watch this video, because Bloodborne is a game that you need to experience blind, and I do not want to ruin a single detail of this game for you. So if you're considering playing Bloodborne, go play Bloodborne and then come back to this video. But if you've played Bloodborne, then let's dive right in. So we start off with the cover of the game. the physical edition, anyway, or the original physical edition with the hunter with his, this is the blunderbuss and the saw cleaver. I have probably bought Bloodborne about 3 times. I bought it when it came out, physical copy. Then I bought the digital version of the game, and then I rebought the digital version of the game on PS5 because for whatever reason it would not recognize that I had bought the game, and I refused to be locked out of Bloodborne. So we have some Japanese text here, which I cannot read. However, there is some English. It says, "Seek pale blood to transcend the hunt." I'm not sure if you guys are going to be able to see that based on it being very small print and red on black. So we start off with our table of contents. We won't go through these. We are just going to go ahead and flip through it. However, if you would like to skip to a certain portion of the art book, go ahead and pause here, look roughly, or take a screenshot, and then just skip to that section, and we have a nice picture of the Yharnam city skyline during the day. Picture of the hunter's dream with the mist, very ethereal. We have the massive moon, here the tree. I have to try and be as objective as I can going through this art book, because I could spend about 10 minutes on each page just talking about every little detail. So we start off with the art of the default hunter. I know it's the default set, and in most Soulsborne games, the default set is usually one of the worst or one of the weakest. However, that is not the case with Bloodborne. The starting set is probably in the top 3 sets of the entire game, and in fact, I actually have a cosplay of this hunter's outfit. If I'm feeling brave enough, I might include a picture somewhere here-ish. Maybe, maybe not, I'm not sure. And then we have the doll, who is our level up maiden. Every Souls game has a maiden, a firekeeper, the lady in black in Demon Souls, and in Bloodborne we have the doll. And the doll is easily the best level up maiden in FromSoft history. Here's a nice picture of what looks like the inside of Yosefka's clinic with some, this is where we start the game, with some of the bat messengers. We also have Gurman, the first hunter, as we meet him in the hunter's dream. He's in his wheelchair with his cane. This is his front, this is his back, and this is him with no hat, which is interesting. I don't think I've actually ever seen this picture of Gurman without his hat on, and it just makes him look even older and even more withered and full of despair. However, his hat does go ludicrously hard. Great picture of Yharnam, the starting area. We have a man here holding a torch, Gothic architecture, and the moon. I cannot praise the architecture and level design in Bloodborne enough. I love this game to bits and beyond. So yes, here is Yosefka's clinic. This is where we start our journey here after receiving our blood transfusion and signing our contract to become a hunter. As you know, or maybe if you haven't played Bloodborne, or if you haven't played Bloodborne in a while, we are a foreigner, or we play as a foreigner who has traveled to Yharnam in search of blood ministration. And we find it, and we get the transfusion at the beginning of the game, but for payment, we become a hunter. Little do we know at the time what that actually entails. Again, we have, maybe this is the player character, maybe this is someone else going through blood ministration, blood transfusion, whichever term you prefer. Some more pictures inside the clinic. Multiple people who have seemingly died during the process. As you can see, the clinic itself has been ravaged and looted, and it looks like pillaged as well. We have the blood IV bag with some surgical tools. This by itself is horrific. If you can imagine a Victorian era style blood transfusion and the equipment used, that's enough to make your skin crawl. And I just increased the camera zoom a little bit so you guys can see some more stuff, or the pictures a bit more clearly. So here is the werewolf. This is the first enemy we encounter in the game. Normally this is a enemy that is meant to kill you. He is very vicious, very aggressive, and does not let up. And when we fight him, we are unarmed. However, it is possible, and actually very simple, to defeat him. All you have to do is sneak up behind him by walking very slowly, do a charged heavy attack, and just keep doing that and getting the visceral attacks. This is the same monster from different views. This is from the side, this is from the front, and this is from behind. Here is our player character in the attire that we start with. We have very simple clothing, yet still very part of the times, and we have a nice hood. Again, there really isn't a bad looking armor set in Bloodborne. Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Demon Souls have some ugly looking armor, but Bloodborne, everything is beautiful. Even if it's not your particular cup of tea, you have to admit that the armor, or not the armor, the outfits are incredible. This looks like Yharnam streets. I need to learn to read Japanese. I consume too much Japanese media to not speak the language. This is again some of the Yharnam streets. We see that it's completely void of life. Everyone's locked inside. Everyone has their warding incense lamps off to try and stay away from the hunt. We have the crow enemy, which we encounter very early, and the dogs, which, if you've played From Software games, you know what dogs are like. And in Bloodborne, I don't know if it's just me, I find them more vicious. Apologies, I just had to take a little drink of water. This is one of the first sights that we see when exploring the Yharnam streets for the first time is a pyre with a beast crucified and lit on fire by the townsfolk. Now, you might think, well, these townsfolk are doing a good job of killing the beasts. However, these townsfolk are half beasts or turning into beasts themselves. This is a horse and carriage. Looks very similar to the carriage that takes us to Canehurst Castle, except these look like different horses. Here is the executioner enemy. We find him at, to the left of where we open the first gate. He is a very challenging enemy at the beginning of the game based on his attacks, and he is a very tanky enemy. We have some more townsfolk. As you can see, they are very bestial in their appearance. Here we have one of the giants. They are called the Huntsman's Minions. These guys rush you with massive bricks or hammers and are very, very tanky. However, these guys serve the purpose of teaching you how to parry with your pistol. They attack very slowly, and if you get a visceral in, that usually finishes them off. And we also have another townsfolk. This guy isn't as far gone as his comrades here and here, but still, I don't think they're aware that they are beasts. I think they still think that they are fully human. Again, we have the carriage. This isn't a carriage that we ride. This is a carriage that we just find throughout Yharnam. Sometimes they're still, sometimes they're shaking as if there's some kind of beast contained inside. And sometimes they jump scare you, especially in Yaragul. And here is a hunter or a man for size comparison. We also have a street lamp, another kind of street lamp. These aren't the normal Bloodborne lamps which serve as this game's bonfire equivalent. This is the bridge where we fight the cleric beast for the first time. He is an optional boss fight. However, he is the first boss fight that you'll probably come across. The first official, or the first real mandatory boss fight is Father Gascoigne. But we'll get to him. Actually, we'll get to him now. This is the arena where we fight Father Gascoigne. I really like Gascoigne as a character, just based on his lore. It's a very tragic story, especially with him, his wife, and his daughters. You can get the music box, which calms him. When we meet Father Gascoigne, he's transforming into a beast and is losing his sanity after killing his wife. And if you play the music box that his daughter gives you if you do her quest line, it stuns him because it reminds him of who he was, and for a brief moment brings him back to his sanity, which is just all the more sad. Okay, here we have multiple different types of hunters. The characters on the left of the page aren't named characters, they are just hunters, both in-game and in concept art. So we have this guy here who looks very menacing, especially with his gloves and lack of a hat. This hunter, which looks more traditional or orthodox in his attire, This hunter, she looks like a female hunter with her pistol, and it looks like a spiked mace on the end of a whip. That, combined with her attire and her hat, makes her look very dangerous and someone you would not want to come across in the streets of Yharnam at night. If this isn't a woman hunter, I apologize. She looks like a woman in this picture. This hunter here is, it looks like this is concept art of the same hunter, and I don't believe this man appears in the game. However, we see all the different variations of both his hats, you know, the more traditional clothing, the more outlandish clothing. This guy has a bunch of strings and straps coming off his arm. All of them look really, really good. One, two, three. Here is one of my favorite characters in the game, Eileen the Crow, the hunter of hunters, or as she says, the hunter of hunters. Now, there's a quote here, and it's probably too small for you guys to make out, but I will read it to you. It says, "Few hunters can resist the intoxication of the hunt. Look at you, just the same as all the rest. The hunters must die. The nightmare must end. Only I can stop this madness." So Eileen, apart from being a hunter of beasts, she is a hunter of hunters who have gone blood drunk, which is to say they have gone mad with bloodlust and have consumed enough blood that they are starting to transform into beasts themselves. Very cool character, and she has an excellent quest. Let us continue. Here is one of the first areas, or later areas, in the first main area, still in Yharnam streets. This is the area where we first meet Eileen. She is somewhere either up here or up here through some crates that you have to roll through. Down here is a big sewer with some very menacing enemies. Here we have some of the enemies that we find in this location. We have the rotted corpse, which drag themselves along the sewers. They look very easy to kill, but do not be fooled. They are very, very dangerous. We have the labyrinth rat. These creatures can range from fairly big to absolutely massive. And speaking of absolutely massive, we have the man-eater boar, which we find at the end of a sewer tunnel. And if you have done the quest for Gascoigne's daughter, you are all too familiar with this beast right here, and beast is the correct word. If you know, you know, but I won't say more. This is a great picture overlooking the bridge where we make our way to the Father Gascoigne boss fight. There is some text here. It says, "When the hunt began, the healing church left us, blocking the great bridge to Cathedral Ward, as old Yharnam burned to the ground that moonlit night. foreshadowing and giving a bit of a hint as to the church's true intentions. Sorry, I didn't know that was in the shot. And yeah, so this not only is the bridge that brings us to the Father Gascoigne fight, but it is also the bridge that connects Yarnham Street to Cathedral Ward, which is essentially, it's not quite the hub, but it's the area where essentially every other area is connected to. So it's not quite a Firelink shrine, but anywhere in the game you can get through or get to by starting in Cathedral Ward. This is the Cleric Beast, which I mentioned earlier, the first boss, despite being optional. His screams, I say his, I don't know what gender this person was, and yes, this used to be a person. As you can probably guess by the name Cleric Beast, this individual was a member of the Healing Church, and if you've played Bloodborne, you know that members of the church transformed into the most horrific beasts, which is why this cleric transformed into this, while most of the townsfolk just transformed into werewolves or lycans or very hairy individuals. Doesn't really matter. If they look like a beast and walk like a beast, they're probably a beast. I'm starting to sound like a Black Church hunter myself. Here is our first look at one of the lanterns, this game's bonfire equivalent. There's a quote here. It says, "Beasts all over the shop. You'll be one of them, sooner or later." This is Father Gascoigne, the first main boss, which I have talked about already. Really, really cool character. I'm torn between describing everything in detail relating to these characters and also trying to save something for, or trying not to spoil everything. So I hate asking this kind of thing. However, if you could leave a comment on this video, this will be part 1, because I think this is going to be a 2-part series, letting me know if you want me to try and hold back on major spoilers, or go full in detail, because I can do either, and I can talk about this man for about 20 minutes. I'm not going to, but I can. This is Old Hunter Henrique. This is Gascoigne's old hunting partner before Gascoigne retired. Henrique is famous as both a very deadly hunter and also by his yellow attire, his yellow hat with his yellow feathers. One of the very cool and probably one of the most colorful sets in the game, even if it is a very muted yellow. This is our hunter player character. I'm just gonna refer to the hunter in the standard garb as our player character hunter, just so you kind of know or feel the journey that we go through in Bloodborne. This is him entering Cathedral Ward after defeating Father Gascoigne. This is the Church of Odin, which is this game's safe hub area. I know I said Cathedral Ward is the hub in terms of you can get to every location from it. However, this place is this game's Firelink Shrine. This is where you send NPCs. This is the safe zone. This is the first resident of the, sorry, I said Church of Odin, it's the Chapel of Odin. The dweller who looks like a monster, looks like an absolute, if you've played any From Software games, everyone who saw this person, or this man, the first time around, instantly thought, this guy is gonna stab me in the back the first chance he gets, when actually he is one of the kindest individuals in Yharnam that's still alive anyway. Here we have an incense burner, a censer, I believe it's called, and a coffin with all the chains tied up. Fun fact, they actually used to do this in Victorian times, not to this extent, but they would chain up coffins and put cages over the graves so that werewolves and vampires didn't rise up. Just, again, really good attention to detail and research for the game. This is outside of the Chapel of Odin to the left. This is the fountain that we encounter. This is one of the gates that we encounter that we unlock later. We have the, what's it called? Tombstone. It's not a tombstone, but it's like a sarcophagus that we pull a lever to move to gain access to an underground path. Here we have one of the church giants. These guys are massive, massive people. Taking them on head on in the early game is, well, let's just say if you do that, you have a death wish, and you better spend your souls before you try and take one of these guys on. Here is some pictures and art of the old workshop we see. This one has some sunlight gleaming in. So does this one up here. This is the wheelchair mounted with a machine gun. If you have played Bloodborne, you were probably shocked the first time you encountered one of those enemies, thinking, oh, this man's in a wheelchair, I can get around him. And then he proceeds to fill you with 50 shots of bullets and kills you. So, that's always fun. Now, here is some of the stuff that I like the most, the character designs. So, up here on the top left, let me see if I can get rid of the glare, we have the Tomb Prospector. This is a hunter who explores the Thumerian labyrinths, and his armor set looks very dusty and worn, as if, you know, he's spent months, if not years, underground exploring long-forgotten tombs. This person is the Black Church Hunter. Now, the Black Church Hunters, there's two types of church hunters. There's Black Church Hunters and White Church Hunters. The Black Church Hunters, first off, they're called Black Church Hunters because their attire is all black. Their role by the church was to seek out any signs of the beastly scourge, even if no symptoms are showing, and were ordered to kill without mercy and without hesitation. So anyone that these church hunters suspected of being a beast for any reason, maybe they actually were a beast, maybe they were just acting aggressive, Maybe the church hunter just didn't like the guy. Doesn't matter. This church hunter can kill with impunity, and it is because of these guys that the citizens of Yharnam hate hunters, because they are terrified of them due to the actions of these people. This is a hunter in the city attire, very sophisticated looking here with his top hat. And here is one of the main NPCs in the game, Alfred, Hunter of Vile Bloods. We will get to what a Vile Blood is later on. However, Alfred is a member of a group called the Executioners. They serve as one of 3 factions in the game. I believe there's only 3 factions. That might be 4, I can't remember. It's very late right now when I'm recording. I don't know if you can tell, but he is very formidable. He comes off as a very polite, very jovial young man when we first speak to him, but as you pursue his quest, you find that that is not the case whatsoever. My favorite part of Alfred's armor and equipment are both his helmet, which reminds me a lot of Pyramid Head from Silent Hill. I have never played Silent Hill, by the way. And his weapon of choice, which is a massive wheel. Essentially, imagine a breaking wheel that Alfred just beats you to death with. That's essentially what it is. We'll get more into the factions later on and explain what the Vile Bloods are, what the Executioners are, and all that fun stuff. Trying not to go beyond the scope of what we are discussing. So here we have a picture of the Great Cathedral in all its Gothic majesty. Again, the art style is tremendous. This game, if you've ever heard that argument about how graphics versus art style, Bloodborne definitely has the art style. Here we have the wheelchair hunter. I believe that's what that says. I actually cannot even see that. This is the enemy I was talking about earlier. The wheelchair-bound individual with a Gatling gun who lights you up. Now here, this is the interesting stuff. So this man here is one of the Black Church hunters, which we already discussed. This person is a White Church hunter. So whereas the Black Church hunters essentially had a license to kill from the Healing Church and killed without prejudice or mercy or hesitation, the White Church hunters acted as doctors. These were the ones that actually tried to help people and treat people who were suffering with the scourge of the beasts. Not to say they were saints. They would absolutely kill you in a moment with zero hesitation. But whereas the Black Church hunters, if they saw a symptom of the beastly scourge, they would just kill you. The White Church hunters would try and help, or if not help, at least study and gather data and gather research. So these guys are more traditional doctors, whereas these guys are just murderers, sanctioned by the church. This is inside the cathedral where we fight Vicar Amelia. She is one of my favorite bosses in the game. And I'm going to keep saying that because most of the bosses, except for one or two, are my favorite. I love them all. This is Vicar Amelia here post-transformation. As I said earlier with the cleric beasts, the members of the healing church transformed into the worst kinds of beasts, and Amelia, being a vicar, transformed into a absolute monstrous beast. For those of you who don't know, a vicar is a very high rank in the church, both in Bloodborne and in real life. So she transforms into this, how do I put it? It's like a wolf and a deer combined. She has the head of a wolf, with sprouting antlers and everything, and when we first meet her in the cutscene, she's still a woman in human form. When we meet her, she's kneeling on the ground praying, holding her amulet. And as you can see here, actually you might not be able to see just with the glare, but even post-transformation, she is still clutching her amulet. So she is a firm believer in the healing church. So, sorry, I turned the page. I had to take a drink of water. This is Upper Cathedral Ward. This is a very late game area, but it kind of connects. It's one of those From Software things where it's an area where you find the door early on, but don't get access to it until much later. So this is the entrance of the Upper Cathedral Ward. This is a celestial child, and this is one of the experiments done by the church and the choir in particular. Now you might be wondering, Crimson, I thought this game was about werewolves and stuff. What's this Lovecraftian looking being doing in my werewolf game? Well, stay tuned because we are going to find out. Speaking of the choir, this is them here. This is their attire, their hat, the bottom part of their attire. They have these very nice, loosely fitting white robes with the black hat pointed down. The choir is a very secretive organization in the church. They essentially do all the most top secret stuff. And yes, it is funny that they decided to name the most elite, most dangerous group of the healing church the choir, because in our world, the choir at a church means you'll get a good song, not witness man-made horrors beyond our comprehension. This is further in. We see more work. We see more interiors. We have our hunter here. It's kind of hard to see with the black background, but he has his pointy hat. This is our brain sucker. I believe we first encounter one of these either later on in Cathedral Ward or when we first reach an area called Bergenworth. Again, this is our second look at something that does not look like a beast, but looks like an alien or something out of a Lovecraft book. Again, Bloodborne is full of secrets, and we will explore them all as we continue through this book. Also, I'm trying not to be dramatic. I know it sounds like I am. I just really like talking about Bloodborne, and getting to kind of be a little bit cryptic when talking about it. I just find it fun. This is one of the areas we find in Upper Cathedral Ward. We have all these flowers here. This is very similar to the arena where we fight an enemy called the Living Failures. And this is the Living Failures. These are people that were experimented on to try and communicate with the Great Ones, which are essentially Lovecraftian gods. Think Cthulhu, think Nyarlathotep, think Shub-Niggurath. Those kind of entities that don't have a tangible form and exist beyond our comprehension. This is the most guarded secret of the church, protected by the choir at all costs, but our hunter manages to fight his way through. This is the Augur of Abritus. Now, who's Abritus? Abritus is a left behind Great One. Now, I just said that the Great Ones exist on a different plane of existence than you and I do, or our hunter does. However, they didn't always. They did possess corporeal forms on Earth. However, they transcended, they abandoned their physical form, and transcended into this new plane of existence. All except Abritus. For whatever reason, she was left behind, so she is now the last Great One. That has a physical body, and it's very sad that all of her kin, all of her friends, all of her, family are gone, and she's left behind. When we enter her cave, she's grieving over the body of one of her compatriots who has transcended, and she got left behind. Why? We don't know, but she did. So if you're wondering, hey, where's this church getting all this blood from? It's from Abritus. They are bloodletting her, and I don't think it's consensual. This is a brilliant spread of Abritus. Very Cthulhu-like, we have the wings of this. Her left wing looks more withered, where her right wing is much more massive. She has, I don't even know how to describe this. This is genuinely straight out of a Lovecraft novel. I'm not even gonna try and describe this. You guys can have a look and decide for yourself what you think she looks like. One thing about the Great Ones is, first off, they are asymmetrical beings, so that's why, one wing is shriveled, whereas one wing is huge. That's why she has some tentacles on her right side, some tentacles on the left side. And also, the Great Ones each are unique beings. They, while all being the same species, we think they have nothing physically in common with each other, and all have very different anatomy. Old Yharnam, which is one of my favorite areas in Bloodborne, but in saying that, basically every area is one of my favorite areas, but I like this area just based on its environmental storytelling alone. So here we see a hunter walking through Oldianum with a torch in hand. Oldianum was burnt to the ground due to it's the essentially ground zero of the Plague of the Beasts. And the church may or may not have given the residents poison or medicine that cures poison to help it, which is interesting. It's like, hey, why would these guys need poison resistance in an area that supposedly isn't poisoned? So here we have some of the decorations and architecture is the word I meant to say, that we find throughout Oldianum. In statues, on buildings, we have some of these little statues here, which we can find on the sides of multiple buildings. They look very similar to the bat messengers. I'm not sure if they actually are meant to be bat messengers. And here we can see a seemingly dead hunter, or at least a person hung upside down in the usual manner, very similar to the hunter's mark, which is essentially just an upside down corpse. And here is one of my favorite characters in the game. This is Jura, the old hunter, and him is probably one of the reasons this area is so memorable to me. So when you first enter Oldianum, you get a warning from him, essentially saying that, hey, these quote-unquote beasts that you're slaying aren't beasts, they're people. And that these beasts mean no harm, so don't harm them. And if you do harm them, he opens up fire with his Gatling gun. However, the beasts are not docile. They will attack you, so if you defend yourself, he will still shoot you with the Gatling gun. I do wish in this area that the beasts were actually totally unhostile. It would just make it interesting to actually be able to walk through and see it without actually having to kill anyone. And these two guys, or actually no, sorry, this is the same hunter, just in different attire. This one he has his cloak and jacket on. This one he just has his normal top. This is the hunter that we fight at the base of Jura's clock tower. Anyone who has played Bloodborne will remember this man very, very well. I certainly do. I remember my encounter with him the first time and getting absolutely decimated by him. But Jura is, apart from just his moral system and beliefs, his design is very cool. He's very similar to Gurman. He's a very old hunter. He used to be a dreamer as well. So he once visited and used the hunter's workshop in the dream, not the actual workshop, because he says, you know, when he kills you, he says, next time you dream, you know, give this some thought. So he knows what your player character is and what situation there is, which just goes to show his wisdom and his seniority as a very old member of the Hunters. This is inside the main chapel or church that we fight our way through. This is the base. We have this creature here hung up on display. I can't tell based on this picture if it is a beast that has been covered with a cloak, or if that is skin from the beast. Based on the boss of this area, which we'll see in a couple pages, I am leaning more towards skin, because well, actually, you know what, I'll save that for when we get to that boss. This is the beast type enemy that we first find in Oldianum, And it's interesting because, and I did not know this until going through this art book, their official name is the Beast Patient rather than just a beast. So this kind of indicates that these were people who were treated in Old Yharnam when the Beast Plague first came through, and whether by design or just due to the Plague of the Beasts, they ended up completely turning fully. Just more very sinister stuff that the Healing Church is up to. Here's some more architecture from the inside of the church. So this is the altar statue. We have here, we have the lower parish area. This is kind of like a zoomed out view of it. And this is the boss of this area. This is the blood-starved beast. And as you can see, he has his back completely flayed. I say he. I have no idea what gender this individual might have been before transformation, so we'll just go ahead and say they. But just flipping back, it's very similar to it's the same color as what's covering this beast here. So I do believe that it is skin. Yeah, the Blood-Starved Beast, while a fairly easy boss and one of the very early on bosses, definitely one of the more memorable bosses in the game. Next up, we are starting the section on the Hemwick Charnel Lane. This is another really cool area. What's cool about this area, in my opinion, is that the enemies that we fight here aren't beasts, or not your typical covered in hair lichen looking beasts. They are seemingly all women who have lost their mind, whether due to the Scourge of the Beasts, whether due to the treatment of the Healing Church, or whether just from the stress and insanity of the hunt. Sorry about that. My phone decided to automatically update during the recording, so we are starting again from the Hemwick Charnel Lane, except this is 2 hours after I had initially started the recording. So yeah, let's just start and continue. Let's not waste too much time with the second intro. So this is some of the details of the environment of the Hemwick Lane. You know, we have some of the outside, we have some of the interiors of some of the dwellings. This is the lift mechanism with the little cage that we activate further on into the level, just as a shortcut to the boss. We have a picture here of one of the dog enemies, just called a hunting dog. But as you can see, it is not only heavily mutated or infected, but also covered in either spikes or swords or blades of some kind. So very ferocious looking animal, and if you've ever played a From Software game, you know that dogs mean very serious business. Sorry, I'm trying to find the right zoom level for this. So let's continue. Some more images of the Hemwick Charnel Lane. We have some of the outside with all of the graves. This is the gate, guarded by the massive man with the axe. I cannot remember that enemy type's name. I do apologize. This is one of the main buildings that we fight our way through. Here are some of the weapons that the women in the lane wield. We have cleavers, we have torches, we have sickles, and this is my personal favorite of them. This kind of, I don't know what it's called, not quite a spear, not quite a halberd, but also glowing at the end, so very, very dangerous weapon. This is one of the enemies that I was talking about earlier. She is called the Hemwick Grave Woman. So, as I mentioned earlier, the enemies in this area are all women, and they don't appear to be beasts, but they are certainly gone mad. Whether from insight, whether from stress, whether from just going insane due to the hunt. My guess is on insight based on how the boss operates. Some more pictures here. This is the Witch of Hemwick here. I'll talk about her in a second because I have a little tidbit or a fun fact. And here is Carith. I know some people say Carol, but From Software takes a lot of inspiration from the Welsh language, and 2 L's at the end of a word comes out as a sound, so it's Carith, or Carith. Sorry, I do not speak Welsh. I am Irish, so for any Welsh viewers, I do apologize. As you can see, Carith has been nailed or tied to a chair and tortured heavily, and this is where we first get the tool to engrave Carith runes onto our mind. So, the tidbit, a little fun fact about the Witch of Hemwick that I was talking about. If you've played the game, you know that she teleports and goes invisible all over the map. And then once you get her to half health, a second one spawns. So you have to fight 2 of them while fighting various shadow demons. However, if you go into this encounter with 0 insight, she will not teleport, she will not be invisible, she just appears as a regular person, and you can instantly just absolutely decimate her because she is a weak boss. It just goes to show how, the insight is messing with our mind and our perception. So the more insight we have, the more we're kind of in tune with her cosmic abilities. Moving on from here, these are some of the enemies that we encounter in the area. This is another picture of the Witch of Hemwick in a lot more detail. As you can see, she is a very hunchback, old-looking woman. She may not be super old, but she looks old. She is covered in eyes. You can see one here, you can see some here, you can see some eyes dangling around her garments here. And just like many of the women in this area, her weapon, I don't know the name of this weapon, but it's essentially an eye gouger. So if she or one of the other women manages to get you in a grab attack, she will rake this weapon across your eyes. So these people obviously go ahead and take people's eyes. This is the Mad One, as I meant, or the shadow creatures that I mentioned during the Witch of Hemwick boss fight. Honestly, these guys aren't that bad, but during the fight they swarm you, so what starts off as a standard enemy that's easy to fell ends up becoming quickly overwhelming. The next area is the Forbidden Woods. Now, there is not a single environment or area in Bloodborne that I do not love. However, the Forbidden Woods is probably my least favorite of the bunch. just because I'm not that big on the enemies. I'm not that big on the outside environment. The inside environment is very cool for some of the windmills and buildings and stuff, but it's a very tedious area. And this is also our first encounter with someone wielding a cannon, and it's actually cool. If you run past all the enemies, kill the man at the cannon, you can then use the cannon to then shoot his fellow comrades, which is just, it's not really that practical, because by the time you shoot the cannon and the projectile travels, the enemies have usually moved, but it's just a nice little addition. So here we have some of the Forbidden Woods area. This is the outside, obviously, with some of the wooden shacks. Same down here. This is one of the buildings that we traverse through. We end up going up on the roof, I believe. If it's not this building, then it is, actually no, sorry, it is this building. I do apologize, that is my fault. They just kind of look the same. Maybe that's just me, but you know. Again, another great picture. I absolutely love this one. So here is a hunter. He's kind of hard to see because it's a very dark image, and he's essentially just a silhouette. He has his saw cleaver in his right hand and a torch in his left hand. And this is the main windmill of this area, which is tedious to fight your way through, but man, it does look cool. Here are some of the enemies that we encounter. So this enemy is called a snake ball. As you can guess, they are a ball of snakes and serpents. If you are familiar with what a rat king is, that's where a bunch of rats get their tails entangled, so they end up becoming this this essentially biomass of, you know, like 30 rats, all with their tails tangled and they can't escape. That's what these enemies remind me of, but just with snakes and serpents. This enemy is called the snake parasite. So when you first see this enemy, he starts off as a regular looking man. Normal clothes, normal headgear, nothing out of the ordinary. So, you know, you go up to him thinking, oh, this will be easy. And then when you approach him, his head explodes into this mass of writhing tentacles and snakes. For me personally, it reminds me a lot of Resident Evil 4 with the Lost Plagas, how some of the later enemies, you know, if you shoot them enough or shoot their heads off, the parasite will pop out of their head. That was my first thought upon seeing this. And yeah, as much as I hate fighting these guys, I have to admit their design is very, very cool. So this is inside of the windmill. You can see that it has its gears that, you know, make the windmill able to work, and you're able to climb across these gears to get some extra items. Sorry about that, I stuttered there. I hope that's visible, because even for me looking at it, it is a extremely dark image. Another picture of the windmill here, just from different angles and a little bit further away. This is the cannon that I was talking about, that you're able to kill the cannon wielder and use. However, if he does manage to shoot a cannon at you, you're going to have a very, very bad time, if not die instantly. So here are some characters that we meet in this area. Sorry, I had to take a drink of water, my mouth was dry. So, these two are armor sets that we can find in this area. The first being the Graveguard attire, which looks very kind of feral, kind of cult-like, with the hoods, with the very dilapidated rags. You know, these guys obviously live in a massive graveyard outside in the untamed wilderness. However, in my opinion, the far more interesting of the two is this attire. This is the White Hunter attire. I think I mentioned this in part 1. However, at the beginning of the hunt, the Healing Church had two kinds of high-ranking hunters. The White Church Hunters and the Black Church Hunters. I won't get into the Black Church Hunters for now. However, the White Church Hunters were the quote-unquote good guys compared to the Black Hunters. These guys, while very skilled warriors, were mainly used as doctors. So instead of, if they encountered someone who was suffering from the scourge of the beasts, or they believed was in the process of turning into a beast, rather than just slaughter them outright, the White Church Hunters conducted medical research on them to try and find a cure and alleviate their suffering. Now, it's not super clear what kind of treatment this was, or if this treatment was voluntary, if this was, say, you know, kind, compassionate care, such as, you know, like treatment trying to make the patient comfortable, or strap the patient down and do whatever you wish to him, or her, sorry. Here is the Master of the League. This is one of the first NPCs we encounter in this area. He's right near the first lantern. He serves as one of the factions in Bloodborne that you can join for PvP. Bloodborne doesn't have that many factions, or as they're called in the Souls games, covenants, but he is one of them. And what I find very funny and very cool about his design is his helmet, if you can call it a helmet, is essentially a bucket over his head with a hole cut out for one eye. So it's very, very impractical, but it is funny, and as a fellow one-eyed individual myself, I think it goes ridiculously hard. Now, here is the boss of this area, the Shadows of Yharnam. These guys are infamous in the Bloodborne community between their weapons. If you haven't played Bloodborne, it is a 3-on-1 fight where one is ranged, but kind of like close-up ranged, and the other one is pure melee. So you'll be fighting the melee guy while having the other one shoot fireballs at you, while having the other guy creep up behind you and spew fire on your back. Very, very challenging fight for your first time, and if you're not sure what to do. Now, what's cool and what makes these guys even worse is once you get each of them to a certain health point, they transform into snake or serpent versions of themselves, and each one is their own separate serpent version. So one of them can have snakes pop up from the ground at the spot you're standing. one of them can essentially stretch all the way across the map and hit you, and they do insane damage. So if you're good at crowd control, this boss is fairly straightforward, but if not, they are very, very difficult, but I do love them. So this is our last page for this area. This is it is called a Grave of a Great One. So it sounds like that either a Great One or someone who was in commune with a Great One was either buried here, or this is a gravestone to commemorate them. I'm more in favor of commemorating them if they are for actual Great Ones. However, if they are for someone who was in touch with the Great Ones, I would say they are more accurately graves. And if you know this area, you know some of the graves can be absolutely tiny, only reaching up to your hunter's knee or even smaller, and some of them absolutely tower over your hunter. So it just goes to show the different types of people or beings that were buried here, if any were actually buried and they weren't just commemorative. The next area is one of the most iconic buildings and areas in all of Bloodborne. This is the Bergenworth Lecture Hall. This is where everything started. This is where they started exploring the tombs. This is where they found the source of the old blood. So everything bad that happens in Bloodborne started right here. Here's some great images of the Academy in black and white. Here is a statue of a messenger. I'm not sure if they just mean a messenger in general or a Bath messenger. By the appearance, it looks like a just standard messenger type person. These ones, however, are called odd-looking statues. However, these ones, in my opinion, look a lot more like Bath messengers, so that's just interesting. What I always find really cool about not just the Bloodborne art book, but From Software art books in general, is you find out what each enemy type is actually called, like their official name. You might know that certain enemies have certain names or certain factions, but this makes it very clear under no uncertain terms what each enemy is properly called, which I think is super cool. So here we have our hunter with his sock cleaver and torch at the gates of the academy or lecture hall. This enemy type, which probably catches everyone's eye once you see it for the first time, is called a fluorescent flower, based on this little design here. He is the one who shoots what appears to be many galaxies at you. And this enemy here is called a Garden of Eyes. This and another enemy, which I'll mention afterwards, are our first real indications in Bloodborne that, wait a minute, we're not just fighting werewolves or beasts, we're fighting God knows what, Lovecraftian eldritch abominations. Just look at these things. You know, this one in game has a very insectoid look. He has a massive head covered in eyes, and he has a very vicious grab attack. Now we're just going to quickly turn the page to see if we see it. No, we do not. So the other enemy that we encounter here for the first time is the brain sucker enemy. These are a corpse white enemy with a human body but a very alien head, and they will freeze you and they will run up and they will shove their massive tentacle for their head either down your throat or into your head and drain any insight that you have. So very dangerous enemy. And like I said, our first real hint that we're dealing with something more than just werewolves and hairy men. And women too, because, you know, the plague of the beasts is gender neutral. Here we have our hunter in the lecture hall exploring. These are some of the scholars that we find, very mutilated. This man's face looks fairly intact, whereas this man's face looks half melted off and gaunt hands. We also find these individuals in the part of the lecture hall which has been transported to the Nightmare Realm. Now this is a very interesting character here. The official name for this character is simply called the Spider, but this is Bloodborne's version of Patches. If you know Patches or have played any From Software game, including Demon Souls, Demon Souls, Bloodborne, all the Dark Souls games, and Elden Ring, the only game in which Patches does not appear is Sekiro, and I believe that's just because he wouldn't fit in with the whole, theme of feudal Ashina. But we won't get too much into Sekiro yet anyway. We'll get into Sekiro a lot more later on. Okay, moving on. So this is a really good picture. We have our hunter, as always, with his trusty saw spear and torch. I like how in this book, the player character hunter seems to be the same character with the same weapons and armor throughout. It just kind of adds to the whole, like, this is the journey of one hunter versus just many hunters that they used to get the screenshots or the inspiration for the artwork. So this is in the Bergenworth School. The hunter is looking at all of these jars of eyes that you can see. There's some on the table here. There's some in these pots, and if you're playing Bloodborne and you're in Bergenworth and you roll through any of these pots, they just explode with eyes because Master Wilhelm, the leader of Bergenworth, was obsessed with gaining eyes to gain more insight. In his own words, he wanted to line his own brain with eyes to become closer to the Great Ones. This is some more inside of Bergenworth. This is the staircase leading up to the higher levels. We have a counter here with lots of candles, lots of jar specimens and everything. Speaking of specimens, we have a specimen here. I actually can't remember seeing one of these in the game. Maybe it's just something that's in one of the preserved jars in Bergenworth. But I'm assuming this is the cage that they kept him in, or kept it in, because I'm not even really sure what that is, or even if it's human. This is a picture, again, of the grand staircase leading up to the second level of Bergenworth, and if you've played Bloodborne, you know there's a very dangerous hunter up here. So here, I don't know if you guys will be able to make it out, but this is the final conversation between Lawrence, who went on to found the Healing Church, who was Master Wilhelm's apprentice or star student, and this is the dialogue that we hear after we touch Lawrence's skull after we defeat Vicar Amelia, so I will read it out for you. I'm not gonna say, I'm not gonna go like Lawrence said, Wilhelm said, but I'll just read it out. So we start with Lawrence and then go to Wilhelm, and I apologize. If I could, I would, but I cannot do voices for the life of me. So we're starting with Lawrence. Master Wilhelm, I have come to bid you farewell. Oh, I know, you seek now to betray me. No, but you will never listen. I tell you, I will not forget our adage. We were born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open. Fear the old blood, they both say in unison. I must take my leave, says Lawrence. By the gods, fear it, Lawrence, says Wilhelm. So, if you're unfamiliar with Bloodborne, Master Wilhelm, who was essentially the headmaster at Byrgenwerth, wanted to continue knowledge and continue learning about the old blood because he knew the dangers that would come with it, whereas Lawrence wanted to use the old blood to try and help people, or at least that was his initial goal. We all know how that turns out. And the two of them ended up having a rift and a disagreement that led to their separation, causing a schism in Byrgenwerth. Those who were loyal to Lawrence and his beliefs, and those who were loyal to Master Wilhelm and his beliefs. So this is Master Wilhelm here as we see him in the game. We see him on the balcony of Byrgenwerth looking at the lake and the moon. As you can see, he's a very, very old man. He has a staff that has some eyes on it. He has, they're not tentacles, but he has some kind of growths, I'm assuming, from dabbling with the blood on his neck and on his face, and he's also covered in eyes. So this is him at his lowest point after essentially everything that he worked for had been taken from him, betrayed by the people who he trusted most, and is now just a very, very sad old man. If you actually kill Wilhelm, when you meet him, you get the, I believe it's the Eye rune, which is one of the Kareth runes you can use, which essentially, I forgot to mention when we mentioned Kareth earlier, Kareth runes serve as Bloodborne's equivalent to rings in Dark Souls, or talismans in Elden Ring. They essentially give you little buffs, like, let's see, what's a good example, like, they give you little buffs, stuff like, gaining more blood echoes. When you die, enemies are more likely to drop blood vials, or more gameplay focused stuff like increased damage dealt, but also increased damage taken. This is Rom, the vacuous spider, who we fight after jumping into the lake, that Wilhelm is looking out for. It is said that the spider of Byrgenwerth hides all truth, and Rom once was a student at Byrgenwerth, and they tried and failed to create their own Great One, and what they ended up with was someone who is kin. Kin is an enemy type in Bloodborne. They're more of the astral cosmic style of enemies. So he's not a Great One. He's not human. He's kind of like humanity's botched attempt. And his boss fight is fairly simplistic, but it triggers essentially the second stage of the game. I'm not gonna explain what vacuous means in case you don't know, just because it's direct, or the closest term to it is rather offensive, but it essentially means Rom, the very stupid spider, but put a little bit less politely, if you know what I mean. This is what we see after we defeat Rom. It says here, when the red moon hangs low, the line between man and beast is blurred, and when the great ones descend, a womb will be blessed with child. We'll talk about what that means later on once we get to it. But this is the moon that changes to the next stage of the game. As you can see, this is what they call in the game a blood moon. It has this very red tinge. This picture only has like a slight red tinge. In the game, it is like blood red. But yeah, that's one of the interesting things about killing Ron, is it really changes the game, and it essentially puts the Scourge of the Beast into overdrive. Anyone who wasn't turned or had only slightly turned is now a full-fledged, not just a beast, but an absolutely vicious beast with no mercy. And enemies in the next couple areas become much more ferocious and aggressive because of it. So our next location is Yahagul, the Unseen Village. You can actually enter this area fairly easy. I believe it's after you defeat Vicar Amelia. If you exit through the front door of the Chapel of Odin, which is essentially the hub in Cathedral Ward, directly to your right is a very pale man with a hat, with a staff and a bag, who is covered in a massive cloak. And if you die to him, he kidnaps you, and you wake up in the bag, and then you end up in a cell. This is the cell here. Oh no, sorry, that's not the cell. I apologize. I'm very tired. This is part of the architecture. But you end up in a cell in Yahagul. So, for some reason, people have been kidnapped and brought to Yahagul for some reason, which we will soon uncover. Like I said in the first part, I'm trying my best to describe the events of Bloodborne without, really going into spoilers. This is the enemy type here, the kidnapper. I'm not sure if you can see him, but he has his cloak. He's holding his sack over his left shoulder. This is the bag here. And these are some of the carriages that you find near Yahagul. Some of them are thrashing, some of them have wailing coming from them. Some of them, if you get too close, giant centipede-like monstrosities jump out at you and attack you. So obviously the victims of the kidnapping to Yahagul is not a fate that you would like, and there's an NPC that you can meet if you've been kidnapped. She is I can't remember her official title, but she's essentially a nun of the Healing Church. And this is just full on me rambling about Bloodborne, so skip maybe 2 minutes if you're not really interested in this. But when you first meet her, she's absolutely terrified, which is understandable. Her name is Adela. The only way to recruit her and save her, and by recruit her I mean bring her back to the Chapel of Odin, is if you wear the attire of the White Hunter, the White Church Hunter set, apologies, she will recognize you as a member of the clergy, and she will be like, thank you for rescuing me. And you can send her to one of two places, one of which being the Chapel of Odin, which, if you haven't played Bloodborne and would like to, always send people to the Chapel of Odin. Won't say why, but yeah. Some more architecture here. The Gothic looking architecture in these games is so good. These are some of the statues that we find. This one here has a head very similar to both Rom and an enemy type or a creature called an amygdala. This one here just has a mass of tentacles, and it almost looks like one of the umbilical cords that you need for one of the endings. So this is the Yahagul black attire. This is actually one of my favorite armor sets in the game. It's one of the few armor sets in Bloodborne to actually have metal in it. It has a metal helmet, as you can see here, and a metal faceplate. Most of the armor in Bloodborne is essentially just Victorian era clothing, because if you explore the Chalice dungeons, you find out that when the Scourge of the Beasts first started up, knights were sent in to the Chalice dungeons to try and slay the beasts. But in their heavy armor, they were too slow and ended up getting ripped apart. So the hunters and the church quickly realized that we need speed rather than defense to defeat these creatures, which is just a cool explanation of like why people are walking around, you know, killing beasts in top hats and monocles and cloaks and just normal clothes rather than full-on armor compared to Dark Souls or Elden Ring. Bloodborne has a lot less armor sets than both of those games, but in my opinion, and same with the weapons, the armor sets are so much cooler, but that's just subjective to my opinion. We have some more architecture here that we find in Yahagul. This is the bell ringer enemy. She essentially acts as someone who provokes all of the enemies and also resurrects them if you do not kill her in time. She's also part of a boss fight, which we will soon cover because that boss fight is also in Yahagul. Some more architecture here, statues, cathedrals. Yahagul is very dilapidated based on it being the unseen village, you know, it was hidden from the rest of the world. We have some people here in their clothing. This is the cramped casket. This is the creature that will jump out of those wagons that I mentioned. Very scary for the first time you play, when you walk up to one and one of these things just jumps out and kills you in 2 hits. Some more artwork of Yahagul with the moon in the background. We have a quote here. It says, "Behold a pale blood sky." And if you remember, our only instruction up until this point in Bloodborne is to seek the pale blood. We're never really given an answer as to what pale blood actually is, but it's just cool that that term keeps popping up even this late into the game. This is the boss of Yahagul, the One Reborn. So, Apologies, I just had to take a drink of water. So let's have a little bit of a lore dump, shall we? So Yahagul is home to a group called the School of Mensis, led by a man named Mikolash. Mikolash was also a scholar at Bergenworth, who left with Lawrence, but then left Lawrence to go pursue his own ideals and agenda, and in the process went quite mad. So you might be looking at this and saying, what is this? The One Reborn, what does that mean? This is the result of all of the kidnappings and all of the blood rituals that has taken place in Yahagul. This is the School of Mensis' attempt to create their very own Great One. And it does not turn out well. This entity is made up of multiple individuals, all of which are writhing and screaming in pain, constantly bleeding, constantly vomiting. It just is an absolute nightmare to be a part of this thing, and is one of truly the most disgusting bosses in the game. Part of this boss fight is having to take care of some of the bell ringer women that we saw a couple pages ago. This is just some black and white illustrations of the One Reborn. So we have one person here, you can kind of see him here. He has a bit more skin in this one, whereas here he's more of a skeleton. You can see some more skeletons in and around here. I'm trying to see, can I see any other body parts? But you see there's multiple legs, there's multiple limbs reaching out, all of which are grasping. You can see it more easily here. You know, there's a couple human legs here, whereas at the front it's more of a monstrosity. But yeah, very poor fate to these poor souls who were taken to Yahagul. I forgot to remove my bookmark, that's embarrassing. On to our next area, the Nightmare of Mensis. So Mikolash and his followers all left the physical plane and entered what's called a nightmare, which is basically a little pocket dimension created by the Great Ones, or the people who have gained enough insight are able to create. So this is the Nightmare Realm created by the School of Mensis. There's a couple other Nightmare Realms created by not Great Ones, but amygdalas, which aren't quite Great Ones, but are definitely not of this world. I hope we get to see one soon. This is what the architecture in the Nightmare of Mensis looks like. It's all twisted. The architecture is all, you know, rocks shaped like skulls. We have the lever here. This is where we activate the shortcut. This is the lift that we use for said shortcut. Also the lift here. The nightmares are absolutely horrifying places filled with the most vile creatures imaginable. This is entering one of the rooms in the Nightmare of Mensis. Anyone who has arachnophobia probably has this room seared into their memory permanently, because when you walk in, about 15 massive spiders jump down at you all at once. So these are some of the creatures that we find in the Nightmare of Mensis. So this is Murgo's attendant. Very small creatures. They have a whip, and some of them have a knife that they will use to grab you. Murgo we will discuss later. You might be asking, who's Murgo and why does he need attendants? We will find out shortly. This is the giant lost child, a very formidable enemy, capable of dealing out massive damage to the player. I did not know that this enemy's name was actually the Giant Lost Child, so I wonder if this once was a child who got trapped in the nightmare and then twisted into this, or if it means that this is like a child of the nightmare that was born of the nightmare, meaning like he just came into existence. I'm not quite sure about that, I apologize. This is Murgo's chief attendant with their chains and massive cleavers. These guys are very big compared to the attendants, so think of these guys as almost like the overseer of the attendants, or the headman. Some more architecture inside the Nightmare of Mensis. The deeper we go in, the more twisted the architecture becomes. We see some floating platforms here. The nightmares do not abide by any rules of our world, any rules of physics, any rules of, what should exist, what shouldn't exist. And all kinds of creatures and people are in the nightmare, whether they were born or created by the nightmare, or entered the nightmare willingly with Mikolash, or were dragged into the nightmare and then ended up being twisted beyond all recognition. All of them inhabit these nightmares. And speaking of Mikolash, this is himself, Mikolash, host of the nightmare. So he is the one who has created this nightmare. His followers were all transported into the nightmare, but Mikolash was the one who created it. All of his followers have this cage around their head, as if to not allow forces to enter their head or disturb them. You can actually unlock this headpiece in the game. It's very cool, and I find it not on Mikolash or the way you find him, but it's actually very funny to wear, I think. When you find Mikolash after defeating the One Reborn, him and all of his followers are dead. They're all in seemingly a lecture hall, Mikolash in the center of the room with all of his students and followers sitting around him in an amphitheater. So what happened was they all entered the nightmare, and whether by not wanting to leave or not being able to leave, their physical bodies all died. In the case of Mikolash, he wanted to stay in the nightmare. He did not want to leave. His followers, on the other hand, who knows? And Mikolash is a very memorable boss fight, but certainly one of the most annoying ones, because it involves chasing him around from room to room, and he has this one spell which is capable of one-shotting you, so there's nothing like chasing him around the nightmare for about 8 minutes, finally getting the chance to do some damage to him, getting one shot by him, and then having to start all over again. And if you've played Bloodborne, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Trust me, I'll never forget. This is Mikolash's boss arena. This is where we chase him throughout this labyrinth that he has created for himself. He has completely lost his mind in the nightmare. If he wasn't insane before entering the nightmare, he is fully insane now, and the entire time of the boss fight, and as you're chasing him, he's rambling. If you've ever heard the phrase cause, or some say cosm, that's a line from Mikolash that he says all the time. We'll get to cause and who and what that is later on. So here is who I was just talking about. Oh, I forgot to mention, this is after we defeat Mikolash and after we keep ascending up the Tower of the Nightmare. So, this is the boss room of Murgo's Wet Nurse. Murgo is the child between the Great One Odin, known as the Formless Odin, and Queen Yharnam, who is a Pthumerian. What's interesting is, and I'm going to quickly discuss Murgo before we discuss who this is here. Odin is known as the Formless Great One, so he does not have a physical body. Like I said in part 1, all of the Great Ones are all physically unique, and because of that, they are unable to breed with each other. So to make new Great Ones, they have to have surrogates, which means impregnating human women. Thus, the child with Queen Yharnam, it's not exactly clear how consensual it is, if it's consensual at all, if, you know, being impregnated by eldritch monstrosity is even remotely interesting. But because he is the Formless Great One, the crib is empty, but it's not empty. That is just because, like his father, Murgo doesn't have a physical form, which is really, really cool. Now this is Murgo's Wet Nurse. It's never made clear exactly what this creature is, whether it's a Great One, whether it's something born of the Nightmare, whether it's something that Odin created to defend his child, but she is able to teleport around, make copies of herself, and is actually a fairly easy boss fight despite being one of the cooler designs in the game. And the whole time that you're fighting Murgo's Wet Nurse, you hear the cries of baby Murgo. So, yeah. And you actually only get, after you defeat Murgo's Wet Nurse, in normal From Software games, when you get the, or when you defeat a boss, you get a message like, you know, enemy felled, or on Bloodborne it often says prey slaughtered. But after you defeat Murgo's Wet Nurse, nothing pops up until you attack or roll into or somehow destroy the cradle. And instead of the normal Bloodborne messages like prey slaughtered, beast slain, we get the unique message nightmare ended. So in defeating Murgo's Wet Nurse and killing baby Murgo, we have ended the nightmare of Mensis. So this dimension, created by Mikolash, and probably by Odin as well, let's be honest, is completely destroyed. And I mentioned earlier with the Shadows of Yharnam, they are Queen Yharnam's kind of bodyguards, I would say. But because Queen Yharnam is below this boss room, kind of looking up at her child with a bleeding stomach and bleeding womb, the Shadows of Yharnam are prowling around in the area. Now you might be asking, how could they be prowling around the area if we kill them in the forest? Well, that's because in the Nightmare, they are different versions of themselves, the same essential beings, but created in the Nightmare for the purpose of defending Queen Yharnam. which is pretty cool. And this time they're not a boss fight, they're just regular enemies, but they still do the same attacks. But by this point in the game, our character is a lot higher level. Let me just fix the camera for a second. There we go. And again, I will be trying to do this with the left page so that the glare isn't covering it. And do please let me know in the comments if this does make a difference, because I really don't want you guys to, you know, have half the pages covered in glare. So let's get started. So we have some pictures of the frontier itself, along with some of the little glowing crystals that we find in the Nightmare Frontier with a hunter to scale. We also have some more artwork of some of the enemies. This enemy here is called a Winter Lantern. Anyone who has played Bloodborne is very familiar with this enemy. Very annoying to deal with, but in my opinion, this is actually my favorite enemy in the game. And fun fact, this enemy actually has the same clothing as the doll in the Hunter's Dream, although in a much more tattered state. So this is kind of what we can assume to be a, you know, severely altered, twisted form of the doll in the Nightmare Frontier. And this enemy here is called a Crawler. I actually did not know that. And I actually can't even remember this enemy in the game, but maybe that's just because it's been a long time since I've played Bloodborne. A long time for me is 8 months. If I go 8 months without playing a game, I consider that like a long time worthy of a new playthrough. Here is an excellent spread of the amygdala enemy. I know that the proper term for the actual part of the brain that controls fear, called the amygdala, is also referred to as the amygdala, but I think I heard somewhere that in Bloodborne they are called amygdalas, which is really cool because one, you only actually see these guys for the first time once you hit, I believe it's insight level 40, I think. I might be wrong about that. If I am wrong, please correct me in the comments. But the amygdala, or the amygdala in real life, is the part of the brain that controls fear. So looking at these guys, you can definitely see why this is a very suitable name. Also, earlier on in the game, especially in Cathedral Ward and leading up to the boss fight with Vicar Amelia, you see lots of statues with heads that are very similar to these amygdala heads. So I don't know if they're statues of amygdalas or if they're just statues with their head based on what the church members viewed them as. But this fight is very, very cool. It's a massive enemy. He's not super difficult, but he shoots the lasers out of his eyes, which is amazing. And it's just an amazing spectacle fight without being a gimmick fight. Here's some more pictures of the amygdala here. These are different variants. So we have this one with the smaller eyes, this one with the more massive bulging eyes. This one has a more tentacled head, very Cthulhu reminiscent. This one shows the enemy from the back with all of its hairs and arms and legs. It's just kind of like a mishmash of feet, hands, arms, elbows, and sinew. We also have some more pictures up here of their different hands. And this is a really cool picture. I actually can't remember seeing this before the last time I went through the book. But this is just a to-scale model of a hunter compared to the amygdala. And as you can see, the amygdala absolutely dwarfs the hunter. Okay, our next area is the Forsaken Canehurst Castle. And I know I have said this about essentially every area in the game except for the Forbidden Woods, but Canehurst is my favorite location in the game. The location is great, the lore is great, the enemies are great. It's just an incredible area all in all. This is kind of the vampire inspired part of Bloodborne. You know, we had the werewolves and the Lycans and all those. So this is the more vampiric part of Bloodborne. And this is actually a secret area. It's not super secret, but it's an area that you can definitely miss on your first playthrough. You get the invitation to Canehurst Castle after sneaking into the back of Yosefka's clinic and finding an invitation which is strangely marked to you. And you also find a second letter with no intended recipient, which we can give to our buddy Alfred, who also makes his way to Canehurst Castle, but for very different reasons, as we will find out shortly. And if not, I will explain it. So this is another picture of Canehurst Castle here. We have some more pictures of the castle itself. This is the carriage that we use to enter Canehurst. It's very reminiscent of Dracula, in my opinion, or the first couple of chapters in Dracula. And when we arrive at Canehurst Castle, we find that the carriage is in absolute disarray and the horses have been long dead, which is very, very cool. So this enemy type, which is one of the types of enemies that we find in Canehurst, is called the Blood Licker. We find these enemies later on in the game, but the ones we find in Canehurst Castle are very gaunt to the point of being emaciated because they are starving. Now, the reason that a lot of the enemies in Canehurst are a lot different to the other types of enemies that we find in the game is, I think I mentioned this before in the Bergenworth section, but one of the scholars of Bergenworth snuck a sample of the blood back to Canehurst Castle, and it ended up still having the same effect on the inhabitants of Canehurst Castle, but it transformed them into massively different creatures than we find anywhere else. I think I mentioned this before in the Bergenworth section, but one of the scholars of Bergenworth snuck a sample of the blood back to Canehurst Castle, and it ended up still having the same effect on the inhabitants of Canehurst Castle, but it transformed them into massively different creatures than we find anywhere else. This is the main entry hall that we find when we first enter the castle. Again, very reminiscent of Dracula's castle in my opinion. We have some of the items of the environment items, like the chandelier, the candelabra, and all of those. So here we have one of the Canehurst noblewomen, which were absolutely slaughtered during the executioner's attack. We find these enemies as specters rather than physical beings, since they are now haunting the castle. If you look closely at their enemy design, they have their throats slit where they were massacred by the executioners, which I just personally find very sad, and we have a bit of the heraldry here as well. So here are some of the portraits that we find as we explore the castle. I'm assuming these are all either previous rulers or nobility or nobles or relations, or maybe even just knights of Canehurst. But yeah, we have men, we have women. This woman here actually has a child, which is interesting. This man looks like he's missing an eye, and actually looks kind of like Bloodraven from A Song of Ice and Fire. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but if you are, you might find that he kind of looks like him. These are two of the attires of the knights and nobility. This is the male attire, and this is the female attire. Actually, this is actually the rooftops of the castle itself. And here is Martyr Ligarius, who is the leader of the executioners and who essentially led the charge in or the assault on the castle itself. What happened to the people of Canehurst is an utter atrocity, and is one of the main reasons I do not like the executioners. When I play Bloodborne, I actually really like the PvP in it, and I always choose to go with the Canehurst faction. We will talk more about Martyr Ligarius once we get to another character, and we'll explain more. This is the Canehurst armor set that we can find in the game, and this is the armor set that I always wear whenever I play Bloodborne, regardless of my build. I just think this armor is so cool. I know that the vast majority of armor in Bloodborne is very much just standard old Victorian clothes, because as we find in the Chalice dungeons, that when they first discovered what lay in them, the knights of the time were absolutely torn to pieces because they were too slow, which is why the hunters and everyone adopted more lighter gear, even though it has less defense. But this one is like the perfect mix of armor. As you can see, he has a full helmet, he has metal armor and everything, with the half cloak. And just as a little aside, if you complete Eileen's quest, the enemy that ends up mortally wounding her, that you fight in Vicar Amelia's arena, actually has or is wearing the Canehurst set, so it's assumed that whoever that hunter was came from Canehurst. And as far as hunter battles go, he or they, I'm actually not sure what that enemy's name is a extremely dangerous foe and not to be taken lightly. He absolutely wiped the floor with me when I first did it. Also, I'm sorry if I keep saying he, if this character ends up to be a woman. It's just a force of habit. Whenever I talk about characters with helmets and stuff that have no voice lines from software, so if this character is a woman, I do apologize. So this is Queen Annalise here. She is the queen and matriarch of the Vileblood Castle. Very, very interesting woman. We'll get more into some of what happens to her later. She is one of my favorite characters in the game. And here is a picture of her, what would you call it? Her main hall where she receives her knights and her nobles and everything. So this is her on her throne here. And there's a bit of a picture here of the throne. And there's also a quote from her here too. So she says, quote, "Very well, drink deep of our blood, feel the spreading corruption. Now thou too art vile blood. We too, the very last on this earth, we await your return for the honor of Canehurst," which I just think is a very cool thing to hear upon swearing allegiance to the queen. The queen's name is Annalise, by the way. And this is her here. This is the last Vileblood queen, Queen Annalise. And the executioners talk about her as being a monster and, you know, the absolute worst abomination to ever grace the earth. But she's not. She's just a woman with different beliefs than the church and the executioners, which I find to be very sad. I'll talk more about Annalise. I'm just waiting to see. Actually, no, this is a new area. So, what happens, I said that we would talk more about Annalise and Marta Ligarius once we get to her. So, the executioners succeeded in essentially genociding the people of Canehurst Castle. However, Queen Annalise is immortal, so she wasn't able to be killed like the rest of the people of Canehurst Castle. So what Ligarius did was he sealed the entrance to her to her quarters and placed a chair in front of it and essentially sat down to wait for all eternity to fight and disparage anyone from coming in to seek audience with the queen or rescue the queen or anything. What he also did was, because she is a vampire, or Bloodborne's equivalent of a vampire, sorry, he put a metal helmet on her which cannot be removed to prevent her from biting people. Now, we obviously defeat Martyr Ligurius, and talk to Queen Annalise, and we have the option of joining her covenant, which we do. However, if you gave that second invitation to Alfred, he makes his way to Canehurst Castle too. And the Queen is immortal and undying. However, what Alfred does is he absolutely wreaks havoc on her body with his wheel weapon, turning her into essentially a pile of red paste. Basically saying that, she won't die, she can't revive, and she's unable to do anything in this sorry state, which this poor woman, her people are annihilated, she's essentially imprisoned in her audience hall, and then Alfred does unspeakable things to her. I feel very bad for Queen Annalise, but maybe that's just because I'm a Canehurst supporter. If anyone is watching that's an executioner, you probably agree full on with Ligurius and Alfred, but I think it is absolutely despicable. So our next area is the Hunter's Dream. This is the Hunter's Dream as we find it in the end game after we have defeated Murgo and all that stuff. So we come back, and hopefully by this point you have consumed all 3 umbilical cords, and if you have, we will get to why later. So here we have Gurman, the first hunter, which I absolutely love Gurman's design in this. We also have a quote from Gurman essentially saying that he's going to show us mercy by freeing us from the Hunter's Dream, which we obviously have the choice of accepting, which if we accept, Gurman kills us with his scythe, and that gets us 1 ending, or we can refuse and start a boss battle with Gurman, and upon defeating him, we get the 2nd ending. Again, this is Gurman, the first hunter. So Gurman is very old and extremely skilled. Do not let his age and appearance fool you. He's missing a leg, but he is an incredibly powerful foe. Now, the 3rd ending that we get if we consumed all 3 umbilical cords, and if we chose to reject Gurman's offer for mercy and defeat him in his boss fight, we find ourselves encountering the Moon Presence, who is essentially the Great One who made the Hunter's Dream and controls it. She is the one that has imprisoned Gurman. Now, there's 2 ways this boss fight can go, or this encounter can go, sorry. If you defeat Gurman without consuming 3 umbilical cords, the Moon Presence descends and grabs you and does something to you, and essentially makes you the new Gurman. You are forever trapped, wheelchair bound in the Hunter's Dream, never to be able to escape. And if we have listened to some of Gurman's hidden dialogue, we find that he wants out more than anything. However, if you have consumed the 3 umbilical cords, then the Moon Presence's attempt to make us the new Gurman and host of the Hunter's Dream fails, and it initiates a boss fight, which I think it's a fairly easy boss fight, honestly, but the whole spectacle of it is incredible. The arena is great, the moon in the background is great, the design of the Moon Presence is great, and yeah, it's one of my favorite boss fights in the game. It's not my absolute favorite, but it is a really cool boss fight. Also, I just want to point out, these aren't stains. This is part of the Moon Presence's design. It's kind of like very ethereal, like, parts of it are floating off and stuff. This picture actually reminds me a lot of the blood-starved beast with its frayed skin. I know it's not frayed skin, obviously, but I just think it looks very, very similar. So, this is the Moon Presence here with a different look to it. This is a much more darker take on the enemy. So that marks the end of all of the book content referring to the main campaign of the game. So next up in the book is our first start into the Chalice dungeons. So here we just have some pictures of some of the starting areas for some of the Chalice dungeons. This is the main layout of the first type of dungeon. This is one of the hallways that connects each dungeon. The way the Chalice dungeons work is there's 3 mini dungeons followed by a boss, and once you complete each main or mini dungeon, you go through one of these corridors with some of these doors here that you can go into to get some extra loot. We have some pictures of some of the lanterns and stuff you can find, along with some of the cave systems in the dungeons. And here is some of the levers and pulleys and gates that you have to go through, because the way the Chalice dungeons work is each dungeon you have to make your way to a lever to unlock a locked door by pulling one of these levers, and then you backtrack to the beginning, go through this gate, it's usually this one here, and then fight the mini boss. This is one of the enemies called the Dungeon Watcher, which I just think is a really cool design. These enemies are called the Mole, which is a very... I'm actually not sure if these enemies are even hostile. They're actually very rare to come across in the Chalice dungeons. This is one of the hunting dogs that we come across, and this is a scorpion type enemy that looks to be a human that was transformed into a scorpion, I'm assuming due to consuming the beast blood. And I think this enemy, the scorpion and the mole are exclusive to the dungeons. This dog, I'm not sure if he's exclusive. I know there's other dogs in Bloodborne, and if you've played Bloodborne, trust me, you are all too familiar with the dogs. But actually, upon looking at it, I believe this dog is exclusive to the dungeons. So here we have some more pictures of the insides of the Chalice dungeons. These are kind of the bowels of some of the areas, they're just caves. Because all of these are Thumerian labyrinths, if you remember. And they are all beyond ancient. This is like, in our day, if we found a bunch of Mesopotamian labyrinths. So they are all absolutely squalid in their conditions. So here are some of the enemies that we encounter in the Chalice dungeons. This is the Warden. He is often one of the mini-bosses that you fight at the end of each of the 3 dungeons. Sometimes there's just one of them, sometimes there's 3 of them. There's one dungeon that I know of by heart that has 3 of them, that gives some of the best blood gems for my weapon of choice, which is the Rachio. That's just because 1, I find it really cool looking. 2, it's Lady Maria's weapon, and Lady Maria is so cool. And 3, I am a weeaboo. Very dark pictures here. I'm sorry if you can't see this, but this is just more pictures of the interior of the dungeons. We see the hunter with his lantern, just kind of showcasing how dark these areas are. This is a great picture here. This is one of the end rooms in the dungeons. And as you can see, even though they're ancient, it's still very well decorated. We have candles, we have statues, we have chandeliers. Same thing here. This looks like the upper floor to this area. Here is the dungeon Wolfman area. I believe this is a type of Wolfman exclusive to the dungeons. And here we have the dungeon Spirit enemy. Both really cool, but not the best enemies in the game, in my opinion. Their designs are really good, but in terms of fighting them, they're not that good. These guys are just essentially weaker versions of the beastmen that we find normally, and the spirits go down in like 1, maybe 2 hits. Some more pictures here of the dungeons and interiors. So this is the dungeon Gravedigger with his pickaxe. And this is the dungeon warrior. He has an assortment of weapons. We have a crossbow, we have a morning star, we have a short sword, a great sword, and a shield. Some more interiors of the Chalice dungeons. This looks like one of the later areas with just the kind of dust in the air and everything. These are some more enemies. So I believe this area here is actually part of the Loran Chalice. I believe this is the 3rd level dungeons that we gain access to. This one is very, very ancient. That's why it's very dusty, very run down, covered in dust and everything. It's not even just dust, it's almost like sand. It's like this was another kingdom that got buried because they succumbed to the plague of the beasts. So this enemy here is called the Silver Beast. This enemy here is called the Loran Cleric. Let me just move that in. Again, he can be found within Loran. This is some of the flora that we find in the 4th level dungeon. I apologize, I actually can't remember the name of that dungeon. Some more pictures here. We have, some of the doors, some of the altars, some more chandeliers with a walkway. I will say the door design in the Chalice dungeons is top notch. And this enemy here is, oh no, this isn't an enemy, I apologize. This is the Runash armor set, which you can find. Very cool. Not my personal cup of tea, but it's very witch-like. Like I said, it's not my favorite. The most of the attire I actually really like. I'm just not a fan of the hat. But that's just my opinion. If you like this armor, let me know in the comments. Actually, you know what? Let me know in the comments, what's your favorite armor set in Bloodborne? And like I said, mine's the Canehurst set, but everyone has their own favorites. And what's great about Bloodborne is there isn't a bad looking set in the entire game. Say what you want about, Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring. There are objectively bad looking armor sets, especially in like games, like Dark Souls 2. But Bloodborne, all of them are really good, and it's not a case of like, oh, I want to find one that looks good. It's they all look good, and it's, oh, I want to find one that suits me, which I think adds to that level of feeling like, this is your hunter, this is you in this universe. So, here are some of the bosses that we find in the Chalice dungeons. These are the end bosses for each of the 3 dungeons you complete. So like I said earlier, you start it, you complete 3 dungeons, each dungeon having a mini boss, and then at the end you fight that dungeon's main boss. So starting, we have the Old Lord Watchdog. Very cool boss, very cool design, absolute pain to fight, or at least in my opinion. I actually struggled with this boss more than I did with any of the main bosses in the game. Maybe that's just me. Let me know. Did you struggle with this guy, or am I just a scrub? This guy here is the Faded Giant. Very cool design. He has this massive sword. He has some kind of, I think that looks like a candelabra on his back, or at least a bunch of candles with chains coming out of him. So presumably he was once chained and has now broken free. This enemy here is the Bloodletting Beast, and is actually my favorite, second favorite fight in the Chalice dungeons. And here we have the Abhorrent Beast, which is another boss that we encounter here. So, and lastly, I believe this is the end of the Chalice dungeon section. This is one of the Fumarians, and he is one of the later bosses that we find in the dungeons, and he's very cool. Fairly straightforward boss fight, but it's just really cool seeing him. If you remember, I think I mentioned this before, or if you're familiar with Bloodborne lore, the Fumarians were initially the first race to encounter the Great Ones and all that. And they sacrificed their chosen women to bear the Great One's pregnancy, or the Great One's offspring, because the Great Ones need a surrogate to, be able to reproduce, because none of them, or no 2 Great Ones are the same. What's cool about the Fumarians, not the Thumerians themselves, but just kind of their kingdom and their time, is at this point, the Great Ones had not ascended yet. So the Great Ones were physical beings on Earth, which I just think is really cool. And then after the Thumerians, some stuff happened which I won't go into because it's very, very deep lore and I want to keep this moving. But the Great Ones all transcended and cursed the Thumerians with the Plague of the Beasts. So this is where it started. And the Thumerians were patient zero for the Plague of the Beasts. And here is my favorite boss in the Chalice dungeons. Not because she is difficult, but just because of the lore. This is Queen Yharnam. We see her spectre a couple of times throughout the games. We see her after defeating Rom, and we see her looking up at Murgo's boss arena. So what's interesting about her here is in the Chalice dungeons, it seems to be that this is actually her, and she herself is a Thumerian, and one of her abilities is to create clones of herself, or illusions of herself. And the way that you can find the real Queen Yharnam is the real one has the bloody stomach after Murgo was removed from her. So she's not that difficult. She's actually very, very easy to fight. However, just me personally, I think her boss is amazing lore-wise. So I think that wraps up the Chalice dungeons. I'm not sure. Yes. And here we start the Old Hunters section. So we of course enter the DLC through two steps. The first step is finding the eye of a blood-drunk hunter on the steps of the hunter's dream. Then, once you acquire that item, you go to the Cathedral Ward lamp, you take the first left, and you are grabbed by an amygdala and sent into the hunter's nightmare. Once this happens, a brief little cutscene plays. It's not really a cutscene, it's more of a cinematic with dialogue, and there was a quote of this dialogue here. It says, "Curse the fiends, and their children too, and their children forevermore. I call to the bloodless wherever they be," which is just very ominous. And we will find out why this person has cursed the hunters and essentially created the hunter's nightmare. Not directly, but just as part of why the hunter's nightmare existed. The hunter's nightmare, we'll get into it more later, but it's essentially a kind of like a jumbled version of Cathedral Ward, almost like Cathedral Ward if it was in a dream. It's like some of the places don't match, some of the places lead directly into other places where they shouldn't, and hunters who are sent here are forced to live out the hunt for eternity, which is an awful, awful fate. We have, I forgot to mention that we have Lady Maria in her chair here, with her weapon across her lap, and the clock tower in the background. It looks like in this photo she has not, I don't know how or what word to use without getting, hammered by YouTube, but she is still alive. It looks like in this photo. She has not decided to take her own life. And when we get to Lady Maria, later on in the book, which I'm sure we absolutely will, we will discuss why she has decided to take her own life. So this is it here, our first entrance to the DLC, the Hunter's Nightmare. So yeah, our next section and location is the Hunter's Nightmare, the location in which the Old Hunters DLC takes place. Right where we left off, the Hunter's Nightmare. So as we can see, we have this mashed up version of Eonum, as it looks like, it's been distorted in a dream, so it's still fairly recognizable as Cathedral Ward, but markedly different, and we'll get to some more pictures showing just that very, very shortly. So here is one of the, I would say, mid-game areas. We have a bridge. This is on our way to where we fight Ludwig. So if we were standing in this lake of blood here under the bridge, if we go straight on ahead, we go to Ludwig's boss fight. However, if we were to turn around and go this way, we would find a cave, and in that cave is a hunter with a Gatling gun, and he is an absolute menace to defeat. It actually almost seems like he is defending beasts. Apologies, my cat decided to body slam the door behind me while I was recording, so I just had to quickly put her to bed. So, as I was saying, if we go straight on, we go to Ludwig's boss arena, but if we go back, we enter a cave with a hunter with a Gatling gun who is seemingly defending beasts, very reminiscent of Jura, both with the Gatling gun and the defense of beasts. So here we have the old hunter attire. This is a set of gear that you can unlock in the Old Hunters DLC, as well as the outfits that the hunter enemies in the Nightmare are wearing, which is just really cool. It's very old-fashioned. I know it's a Victorian era setting, but in the Nightmare, all of the hunters look like they're wearing, even older clothing and much more basic but still brutal weapons, maybe not as refined, just because they have been some of the first hunters that were trapped here, and maybe the weapons weren't quite up to speed. Here is an enemy called the Nightmare Executioner. Now, the Executioner is an enemy that we fight and encounter a lot in the main story of Bloodborne. However, in the Nightmare, where everything is twisted, he seems to have sprouted tentacles from his face and is wielding a church cannon. So this enemy is extremely powerful and not to be trifled with. Personally, for me, every time I see one of these guys, unless I absolutely have to, I always just run past them. But that's just me. Up next, we have a picture of the inside of Ludwig's arena. We find Ludwig at the back here. If you have played the DLC, then you know that Ludwig is probably the best boss in the DLC, if not the best boss in the entire game. And speaking of Ludwig, here he is himself. Now, we learned earlier on in the book and also in the lore that the members of the Healing Church transformed into the worst beasts imaginable. And Ludwig, being the founder of the church, seems to have transformed into the most monstrous beast of all, with a half horse looking appearance. He has a horse face with hooves, with many mouths all over him. He is an absolute monstrosity, but he still has his wits and his mind about him. And in his second phase, he pulls out his famous Moonlight Greatsword and wields it with extreme skill and dexterity. So even in this sorry state, Ludwig is an incredible foe. As you can see here, the blade is on his back, and this is his face and his head. Let me just move it here. His head right there, so a very horse-like looking appearance. Our next area of the DLC, this is after we defeat Ludwig, is the research hall. So this is a bit of backstory. This is where the Healing Church and the Hunters tried to create emissaries to commune with the Great Ones under the guise of treating and healing the sick. And despite this, Lady Maria, who we will find out more about her later on, she knew this full well, and while she knew she was powerless to put a stop to it, she visited the patients here as much as she could and did everything in her power to ease their suffering. So Lady Maria, while being a hunter, while being a killer, and an extremely skilled killer at that, she still has her compassion and her love and her humanity about her, which is what makes her one of my favorite characters, not just in Bloodborne, but in all of From Software games. Here is our hunter, player character with a torch, just to kind of give you a scale of how massive this research hall and laboratory is compared to just a standard man. Here is some more pictures of the inside of the research hall. We have some beds up here, and here we have more beds. I believe this is the area where we fight two NPCs. I might be wrong about that. I might be a different area, but again, this place is just scattered with beds and patients tied to them in absolute agony, all in the hopes that they can create something to commune with the Great Ones. This is our hunter at someone's bedside. I don't know if you guys will be able to see this, but this text simply just says bed. You know what, I'm actually just going to zoom in a little bit. Let's see, there we go. This is the lift that we use to actually enter the research hall from Ludwig's arena. We go past his arena and defeat two NPCs, and we gain an item which we place in this body, which then activates the lift. Before we go any further, just circling back to Ludwig, sorry, I forgot to mention this when we were on him, just because I'm so tired. One thing about Ludwig is that if after you defeat him, if you rest at a lamp or travel to the hunter's dream and then come back, Ludwig's head is on the floor still alive, and you can go up and you can talk to him. When you talk to him, remember, he is the founder of the church, so all of the black church hunters and the white church hunters, which we covered in part 1 and a bit in part 2, Ludwig asks, basically, did his hunters turn out to be, the noble paragons of healing and goodness that he intended them to be? And we have 2 options of dialogue. We can either lie to him as he's about to die and tell him that yes, they are as virtuous as he wanted, or we can tell him no, that they are a failure, that they are beyond despicable and caused untold amounts of pain and suffering and death. Each one gives a different answer, but if you tell Ludwig that his hunters did live up, he sighs in relief and essentially says that, despite his transformation into the horse creature, that it was worth it as long as he was able to do some good, which is actually very sad. And then after that encounter, if you rest at a lamp or go back to the hunter's dream again, and then come back to Ludwig's boss room again, we find that his head has now been killed by Simon, who is the main NPC in this DLC. Simon has a weapon called the bow blade, and Simon put an arrow through Ludwig's eye, killing him. So I think that's a mercy, honestly, for Ludwig, based on what he had become. But yeah, it's a very interesting part of the DLC, which just adds a lot to Ludwig's character, and is one of the reasons why I like him so much. Is this still in frame? Yes, it is. Okay. So we have a patient strapped to a chair. Here is a patient strapped to a bed. This just says clockwork patients. So these are some of the patients that we find in different states of disarray and sanity and pain and everything. Here, this is one of the bosses called the Living Failures. Now, if you have played Bloodborne, or if you remember from earlier in this series, there's an enemy type called the Celestial Emissary. They are the blue enemies, which look like aliens that have the very small body and these massive heads that look like they have little galaxies inside them. So this is what these patients eventually turned into, are these living failures. And they're called living failures because, they're living, but they're not able to commune with anything. However, we do know that eventually the church did manage to succeed in creating emissaries, but it's difficult to think about how many people had to die and suffer in order to make that happen. This is the boss arena for the Living Failures. The Living Failures are a very decisive boss fight. Some people say they are the easiest fight in the game, and others say they are the hardest. They are one of these boss fights where it's not just one enemy, there's multiple of them and they keep spawning. However, they all collectively share one health bar. So you're able to kill one, say, but then two more take his place. But the damage that you did to that one goes towards the overall boss health bar. The reason it's so divisive is because they have one attack which essentially rains meteors down on the boss arena, which, unless you have a good deal of health, almost a one-hit kill. So I know a lot of people get very angry at this fight, myself included, whenever I play Bloodborne, and I play Bloodborne more than I would like to admit. I either do this fight first try no problem, or it takes me about an hour, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. So here is a picture of the clock tower, which is the next area that we go to after defeating the living failures. And the clock tower is home to none other than Lady Maria. So when we first find Lady Maria, she is in the clock tower and she is dead by her own hand. She has ended her life for reasons we will discover later on. When you approach Lady Maria, it will initiate her boss fight. But first, she has a quote here, so let me read that real quick. So Lady Maria says, "A corpse should be left well enough alone. Oh, I know very well how the secrets beckon so sweetly. Only an honest death will cure you now, liberate you from your wild curiosity," which is just such a cool line. And her boss fight, while relatively easy, she's very parryable. It's, again, one of those spectacle fights, and Bloodborne is the master at hunter on hunter or NPC on NPC boss fights, in my opinion. Now, fun fact about Lady Maria, I don't even know if you can call this fun, but it's definitely a fact. The doll that is in the Hunter's Nightmare that Gurman made is based on Lady Maria, as they were both some of the original hunters, so they knew each other. What makes it creepier, though, is that you can find the Hunter's Dream in the waking world, which is just a normal version, like a normal workshop and stuff. But the doll is still there, and Gurman has this famous line when you first start the game, saying, he says something along the lines of, you can use all the equipment that you can see in the workshop, and then he whispers, even the doll, if you so desire. So Gurman made a sex doll out of one of his comrades in arms because he had a crush on her, which I think it's good that Lady Maria died before she found that out, because that's just absolutely awful. But here's some more concept art of her with her Rachio. Again, that's my favorite weapon in the game. After we defeat Lady Maria, we go through the clock tower and enter our final area of the DLC, the fishing hamlet. I know a lot of people say that Bloodborne takes a lot of inspiration or just straight up copies stuff from H.P. Lovecraft, which is true. However, the fishing hamlet is probably the most obvious reference or copy from H.P. Lovecraft, especially his story, The Shadow over Innsmouth. I'm not going to spoil that here, but if you have not read it, And like Bloodborne and like Cosmic Horror, definitely go and check it out. Okay, let's continue. So here we have some pictures of the fishing hamlet, which has become an absolute ruin. You can see some of the houses down here. These are what have become of the villages. They have transformed into these half-human, half-fish hybrids with barnacles sticking out of them. These two have spears, which actually makes sense, because it's a fishing village. So yeah, people would have spears. These are some more enemy types down here. This is the well that we find near the center of the fishing hamlet. Now, this is where Lady Maria, after seeing what the hunters and the church did to the poor people of the fishing hamlet, she was so disgusted and so ashamed, she threw her weapon down into a well, went back into the clock tower, sealed it so that no one could enter, and then took her own life. So this enemy here is called a giant fishman. It doesn't really look like it in the photo, however, in-game they remind me very much of sharks. So when you jump down this well, this enemy is the strongest type of enemy in the fishing hamlet. He's an absolute tank and takes ages to take down, and the movement is so erratic, and for something of that size, they move incredibly fast. So when you jump down the well to get the Rakio for yourself, you find not one, but two of these guys. And then once you defeat them after multiple attempts, because let's be honest, it takes everyone multiple attempts, you get the Rakio. Definitely makes you work for it, but it's well worth it. I know I'm like a broken record saying that it's my favorite weapon. One bad thing about it being my favorite weapon, though, is it being at the very end of the DLC means that for starting a new game, you essentially have to play through like 4/5 of the entire game just to get it. And then it's great for like New Game Plus, but for your first run, you pick it up and then 10 minutes later the game's over, which is annoying to say the least. This is deeper down in the tunnels under the fishing hamlet. As you can see, there's loads of slugs and fish and everything. As we know, slugs are related to the great ones, so something's happening here to do with a great one or some kind of cosmic force. Here we have a enemy called the Snail Lady, which is a lady who has become a snail. Very terrifying. Again, very Lovecraftian. Actually kind of reminds me a bit of Junji Ito, but maybe that's just me. And here we go at the end, the Orphan of Kos. So let's do a little bit of a lore dump just so you guys know what I'm talking about. So Kos is this creature here. Kos is a great one. Kos washed up on shore dead, and because of that, the townsfolk began to worship Kos. That's what transformed them. That's what made them what they are when we enter the village. However, Kaz was pregnant, and when we arrive, despite being dead, Kaz gives birth, because, you know, death for a great one does not mean death the same way it does for you and I. So this is the orphan of Kaz. While he appears to be a massively tall, full-grown man, at this point he's maybe 20 seconds old, and his weapon of choice is his placenta, which is horrifying and amazing at the same time, and the screeches and screams this thing yells out are terrifying. Absolutely great encounter. I know Bloodborne is technically a horror game as well as a Soulsborne game, but the fishing hamlet to me is the most horror that Bloodborne ever really gets, and trust me, it gets it. It knocks it out of the park. Here's a great picture. This is after we defeat the Orphan of Kaz. We have our hunter looking at the moon in the sky, and that is the end of the DLC. So here we just have some different types of characters and armor. So first at the top here we have Yamamura the Wanderer. Down here we have the Butcher's Attire. I believe this is a set of gear that you can acquire in the game, though I'm actually not sure, as I have never personally picked up this set, or maybe I have and I just cannot remember. Here we have Brador Church Assassin. This one confuses me because a little bit, because is he an assassin for the Brador Church? And if so, what is the Brador Church? Or is his name Brador, comma, the Church Assassin? I think it's Brador, comma, Church Assassin, which makes sense for Bloodborne. You know, the Church having assassins is nothing new. And finally, we have the Harrowed Attire, which is here. This is actually the armor, or not the armor, the gear we get from completing Simon's quest in the DLC. Simon is kind of like a little guide. He doesn't really guide us, but he shows up close to every bonfire after we defeat each boss. And he is also the man that has the bowblade weapon, which is, in my opinion, it's not that great. It probably is really good if you have a good build with it, but for me, I don't really like it. Next up is some of the weapons. So we are just gonna run through these quickly. So starting off, we have the Hunter's Axe here. We have the Threaded Cane. This is it in its standard form. This is it when it's elongated and turns into a whip. Here we have the Saw Cleaver in both positions. Next we have the standard Hunter's Pistol. This picture is actually really cool of it kind of in the middle of reloading. Here is the Hunter's Blunderbuss. I've never been a fan of the Blunderbuss. I always just go with the pistol, just because it sprays like buckshot, whereas the pistol just shoots one single straight bullet, and at the end of the day, they both do the same job. I'm not sure if the pistol has more range. I think it does, but don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure I'm wrong, actually. Okay, next up we have the rifle spear, aka the worst weapon in the game. The rifle spear is a perfect example of a excellent idea that was executed horrendously. It is so bad, and this isn't just my opinion. Ask any Bloodborne player about the rifle spear, and they'll tell you that it's awful. So this is the Tonitrus. This is a mace-looking weapon that has an ability, or that secondary ability is to charge it full of electricity, which is really good against enemies that are weak to electricity. It's definitely worth picking up in case you ever get stuck and you need that little bit of extra elemental damage. But yeah, it's a good weapon. It's not great. And keep in mind, all of me saying this, I'm a Rakuyo guy, so just keep that in mind. Here's the Saw Spear, very similar to the Saw Cleaver, just a lot thinner and a lot pointier. This is the Stake Driver, which I think is very cool. It's an okay weapon, honestly, but just the design of it, I think, is absolutely incredible. Yeah. Okay, moving on, we have the Blades of Mercy, which is Eileen's weapons. They are one dagger that is comprised of 2 daggers, and then their trick weapon is to then dual wield 2 daggers, so they are very good at quick, fast attacks, especially if you are going with something like bleed or anything like that. Then we just have the wooden shield and the torch, which aren't anything special. The torch actually is special. I take that back. The torch is a very useful thing to have. The wooden shield, not so much. Sorry, got ahead of myself there. So next we have Ludwig's rifle, which just looks incredible. This is a weapon that we find in the old Hunters DLC. I absolutely love this thing. I never play with characters that can use it. However, I just always admire it based on how it looks. Next, we have the repeating pistol here. Not really much to say, it's just a pistol that repeats, but it does have a very cool design. I do really like the Bloodborne take on kind of more grounded weaponry. Like, they do have the more fantastical weapons, don't get me wrong, but the take on like grounded weaponry with just a little bit of make-believe mixed in is always really cool to me. Here we have the Kirk Hammer, one of my favorite weapons. I never use it. In every From Software game, I play a strength faith build. However, in Bloodborne, I dex to the max. So it has 2 forms. The first being its heavy form, which is essentially a giant stone that acts as the sword's sheath, which you use as a hammer to smash enemies into pulp. And then the other form is just a standard longsword for quick attacks, which it's a very good combo, and I think the Kirk Hammer, in my opinion, is the best example of the trick weapon system in Bloodborne. Here is Ludwig's Holy Blade. I'm actually not that big of a fan of this weapon. It's okay. I mean, stat-wise, it's really good. It's one of the most popular weapons in the game, but to me, it just feels like a Dark Souls weapon. It doesn't feel like a Bloodborne weapon. I don't know how to describe it, but if you've played Bloodborne, then you know what I'm talking about. Let's continue. So here we have the cannon, which is a cannon, which I don't really need to say much else. It's incredibly powerful, but it burns through your Quicksilver bullets like you would not believe. So it's very much a gimmick weapon, but it is very, very fun to use. I will give you that. Next up, we have the flame sprayer here. Not really that big of a fan of it. We get this right at the start of the game, after. So we have the flame sprayer here, which is essentially a flamethrower. I don't really like it. I'm sure someone does, but it's just not really my playstyle. Next up, over here, we have the Rosa Marinus. I believe I'm saying that right. If I butchered it, I'm sure someone will let me know in the comments. Again, same kind of thing as the flame sprayer, just not for me. Here is the Garius's wheel. So these are one of the weapons used by the executioners, and this is what Alfred uses when he attacks Annalise at Canehurst Castle. Very, very brutal looking weapon. Here we have the Shikage, which is a katana. This is another Canehurst weapon. I really like this weapon a lot. I think it's good. My build in Bloodborne, by the way, is Dex and Blood Tinge. So this with the Evelyn handgun, which we'll get to shortly, is a brilliant combination, and I absolutely love it. The Rakuyo is always going to be my number one, but the Shikage is definitely my number two. The Shikage is what I use up until the point where I get the Rakuyo, because like I said earlier, you have to essentially get to the end of the game to get the Rakuyo. This is the Reiter Palash. Again, another Canehurst weapon, very elegant, requires Dex and Blood Tinge. It's like a sword with a little pistol over it. Very cool design, but I do not like this weapon at all. Here is the Evelyn. This is my go-to handgun in Bloodborne. Even if I'm not doing a Blood Tinge build, I always use the Evelyn just because I think it looks really cool. Blood Tinge, by the way, allows you to, if you have any pistols that scale with Blood Tinge, you can actually do significant damage with your pistol instead of just using them for parries and riposts, which I think is really cool. So here we have the Blade of Mercy. This is German's scythe that he uses during his boss fight. Once we get it, this is a weapon that we only get in New Game Plus. So you have to beat the game at least once to be able to unlock this, but it is so much fun to use. Next, we have the Boom Hammer. These belong to the Powder Keg Hunters. Their motto is, if it don't got kick, it just ain't worth it. And what it essentially is, it's a hammer that when it hits the ground, it causes an explosion, which is hilarious on its own and devastating to the the recipient of the attack. But what I find personally funny is all of the other Hunter Workshop groups essentially consider the powder keg hunters heretics because of just how insane their weapons are, which I think is so funny. Here we have the Beast Hunter Scythe. This is getting into the old hunter weapons now. This looks like a kind of like a proto saw spear without the serrated edge. But yeah, the old Hunters DLC does have some good weapons, but I'm not really a big fan of them apart from the Rakio. Here is the Beast Hunter. Here's the Beast Cutter. As you can see, this is it in its standard form, which is it's not even a proper cleaver, like it's properly blunt with these teeth coming out of it, but then it extends into a whip, kind of like the threaded cane. This is the weapon that you're gonna find most of the hunter enemies in the Old Hunters DLC using, and it can be very annoying if you do not deal with it quickly or if you do not learn the parry window. Once you learn the parry window, it's a piece of cake. Here we have the Whirligig Saw, or the Beyblade. It actually is really good. Jokes aside, like for enemies who are weak against serration damage, this is really good, but other than that, nah. Its second form though is just essentially a mace, which is good, but you know, yeah. Next up is the Church Cannon. This is a massive cannon wielded by some of the heavies of the church. It's a lot better and higher damage than the cannon that we saw earlier. This is the Gatling gun. This is what the hunter in the cave that I mentioned earlier uses, that we can acquire. Again, very fun to use, but burns through quicksilver bullets like you would not believe. The piercing rifle, I have actually never used this weapon, so I am not going to make any comments on it. Here is Simon's bow blade. So it's a bow and arrow that has the ranged aspect, but then transforms into this curved sword, which is awesome. I really like the ingenuity that the team at From Software came up with of how to transform essentially the same weapon into two completely different weapons, both in function and in appearance. Yeah, I don't like using this weapon, but I think looking at it is so cool. This is the Blood Letter, a very arcane weapon. I'm not super familiar with it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. Over here is my beloved, the Rakuyo. So it is a katana and a tanto, or a dagger. You can use them in one of two ways. You can either dual wield them with one in each hand, or you can slot them together to create this double-sided spear, very reminiscent of Darth Maul. And the moveset for it is crazy, and that's why I love it. This is the Church Pick. It doesn't really... Actually, no, it does do it justice here. And fun fact, this is always another weapon that I use a lot, because it does incredible piercing damage. So it starts off at this kind of small, mini spear-looking weapon, but then transforms into this massive scythe that you can like impale enemies from a great distance. And it's great for keeping enemies at a distance if you are getting overwhelmed. though it is not good at crowd control. Next up, we have the amygdala arm. We get this, I actually can't even remember where we get this, but it's a very interesting weapon. Again, I've never used it. I've never really done arcane or magic in Bloodborne, but it is fun to use. I've seen gameplay of it and it looks awesome. This is the Beast Claw for those of you who want to embrace your inner beast. In the DLC, there is actually a way to temporarily become a beast. And with this equipped, you do insane damage, which I just think is so cool. Over here we have the Cause Parasite, which is a arcane weapon in Bloodborne, which is essentially Bloodborne's version of magic. Again, I've never used magic in Bloodborne, so I'm not sure how good it is or not. I do know that its main attack is it launches a massive tentacle out of your hand that does massive damage. Here we have the Lock Shield, Lock meaning lake. Again, never use this because I just avoid shields like the plague in Bloodborne. And last but not least, I believe, is the Moonlight Greatsword, which it would not be a From Software game without the Moonlight Greatsword. To me, it falls into the same category as Ludwig's Holy Blade. It seems like a Dark Souls weapon and doesn't really belong in Bloodborne. But it is still really fun to use, and if you like using it, then by all means go for it. Do and play in whatever way makes you happy. Next, we just have some items, so we're not going to go through them all, but we have, Quicksilver bullets, Hunter's Mark, pebbles, fire paper, electric paper, Madman's Knowledge, Great Madman's Knowledge. All of the consumable items are not consumable. Actually, yes, some of these are consumable and some of them are used for certain things. Here we have more magic-based items up here. Here, these are Blood Echoes, which are Bloodborne's version of souls, or runes if you play Elden Ring. So these are where you go and you pick up and you get a certain amount of them that then you can use in your inventory later to gain a certain amount. Here we have some gems, or blood gems that we can equip into our weapon, along with upgrade materials like bloodstone shard, bloodstone chunk, all that stuff. Same thing here. These are key items that we find throughout the game. Let's see. These are mainly just keys. Oh, this is actually Annalise's flesh that you can pick up once Alfred is done with her. And if you have this in your inventory, and way back in part 1 where we talked about Abritus hidden by the choir, who was kind of mourning one of her dead kin over an altar. If you go to that altar with the queen's flesh in your inventory, you have the option of reviving her, which I just think is really, really cool. These are the different chalices that you need to access the chalice dungeons. You get some of these organically just by playing and progressing the game. Others you get by playing the chalice dungeons themselves. Next up, we have some more Chalice Dungeon items. Here are some bloodstones that we use for leveling up and enhancing our equipment. These are Kareth runes. These act essentially as rings from Dark Souls or talismans from Elden Ring, where you equip 2 of these and you gain a little bit of a perk. And it's interesting the way you do it in Bloodborne. It's not a case of putting on a talisman or putting on a ring. No, you engrave these symbols into your brain to get them to work, which I just think is such a cool idea and a cool take. Because these are abilities from unknown eldritch horrors, so you would need to do something similar to that to be able to, 1, understand what they actually mean, and 2, to use them. Also, they're called Kareth runes because Kareth was a member of Bergenworth who had a skill for deciphering the Great One's speech, and these are what he made for them. And over here, we just have some more items and stuff like that. And that, everyone, is the end of the Bloodborne official artworks book. Thank you so much for sticking through this whole series. I really hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed going through the book. I've gone through this book a couple of times now. This is probably my 3rd time, and every time I still love it. I love everything to do with Bloodborne, and being able to share it with you guys is an absolute treat for me. So the next art book that we are going to be covering on the channel will be another From Software game, though I'm not sure which one just yet. However, if you have a suggestion for another art book that you would like me to cover, first, please leave a comment down below, and I will be sure to cover that book. If not next, then after the next one. I will cover essentially whatever books you guys want me to cover. That's my main priority. So your viewership means the absolute world to me. If you are watching this video or listening to this video as you are going to bed, this is the end of the video, so I would turn it off now so that the ad does not wake you up. Again, thank you so much for watching. My name has been Crimson, and I will see you guys in the next video. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.